Hey everyone, welcome back to God Only Knows What episode this is. See what Murph has written above the episode for the number. This week we were joined by a fantastic guest in Eoin Maguire. Eoin is, I suppose, most well known for his work with EXOS in Ireland. He's had a huge wealth of experience from working with them over in the US and from his own experience working here with intercounty teams, high performance athletes. He's involved in rugby and so on. There was a lot there today. There was a lot there to pick through, and he gave us some great insights into some important things even to consider from a young coach perspective, what kind of things to be mindful of when looking to develop yourself as a coach, on top of plenty of other things from an actual S&C perspective. But yeah, how did you find today, guys?
Yeah, I tried to put together a fairly set topic guide beforehand, and we went completely off it today because Owen had so many different interesting things to talk about. I think most notably the advice for young coaches, and even not necessarily young coaches, just of the more softer skills you can develop as a coach, which I think are very important. Shane?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really think we delved a lot more into what you require to be an S&C coach apart from what's in your S&C book kind of thing. And it was also just really cool to hear about the Combine, because the Combine is awesome. For anyone who hasn't watched it before, you should.
Actually, on the Combine, if someone wants to find out a little bit more about that, the episode of The Toughest Trade with Aidan O'Shea a few years ago is a good way of giving an overview of what it is and what's involved, all like that.
All right, let's jump on into the episode.
So, Owen, you've quite the wealth of experience, a few different sports, worked with a few high-level players, a few high-level athletes we were discussing beforehand, but surely the highlight of your career so far has been with the Carlow Minor Hurlers.
Yeah, good experience working with Carlow seniors all the way down through the levels. I was only there for the 1 year, so obviously I would have liked to be there for a little bit longer, but another role came up within Cavan GA, so jump ship there. My dad's from Cavan, so kind of have a little bit of graft for Cavan, so that's how I ended up there. But good year experience. That was my first experience with a county setup, so yeah, it's great.
When was that? Back 2013-14, was it?
2013-14, yeah, the year 22. Because before that, the kind of connection there was I'd done a little bit of work with O'Loughlin just in their pre-season. Carlo Dwyer was the manager. So one of the senior hurlers, Mark Brennan, had asked would I be interested in getting involved, and I was kind of still playing with senior with my own club, St. Bridget's. So yeah, I could only do a little bit of pre-season work with them, more consultancy based stuff. So kind of started there, and then that's how the connection into Carlow came, and yeah, had a good year.
Yeah, no, a few of my neighbours were on the minor team that time. They still speak quite highly of you, actually. No, I don't mean actually, but they just still do. How did you end up there then? What's some of your background? Like you said, you played a bit for St. Bridget's still at that stage, but what was your kind of sporting experience growing up? Is that what led you to S&C, or was it something else?
Yeah, I suppose like any young lad in Ireland, it's kind of like the GAA and soccer type background. So played relatively high level up to under 18 with soccer and GAA. Played with Home Farm in St. Pat's, DDSL Premier all the way up as a youngster. Played with my hometown club Verona as well at the start, and then kind of went to Home Farm and then to Pat's. But had also played GAA, so kind of was actually playing a year out of my grade with GAA. So some weekends I was playing, say, under 13s, but I was actually under 12s, and I was playing Saturday and Sunday and a soccer match, which when you look back on, not ideal. And that's why I was kind of getting hip groin pain at that age, and at physios when you're that young when you really shouldn't be. But yeah, kind of that was the background. Had a love for sport in general, like watching rugby and different types of sports, golf, boxing, and then kind of later into MMA and stuff like that. But yeah, kind of that's what really got me into it. Got asked into the Dublin minor panel in 2004. So kind of the way they did it was they kind of Fingal had a team, North Dublin had a team, South Dublin and stuff like that, and then there was trials that way, and then it was kind of picked into a team. Got onto the kind of like 35 man panel. Played the Leinster League and stuff like that, and then we got tested as well at DCU, and that's kind of where I got my first experience and exposure to testing and stuff. Went into DCU for the day, done your usual test, your your sprints, your jumps, Wingate, which for the first experience as a 17, 18-year-old was definitely not nice. But basically didn't make the 26 for the championship. That year they went on, we hammered Wexford and then lost to Laois, a pretty decent Laois team. But like, it was a pretty packed team, and I suppose the reason why I was being like mentioned when I wasn't in the 26, it was like, maybe not strong enough or powerful enough, felt like I was aerobically fit enough or kind of fit enough to play the game. But like those types of things they're the things that was mentioned here. It's like, well, right, I need to kind of investigate these a little bit more, and that's where the kind of interest in going into sports science and strength and conditioning kind of came from. But that's where it kind of started, and then went into my degree in WIT and exercise and health studies, 4 years there. And then I eventually went on to do a master's, but in between I was looking around at different things. Like, felt like when I came out with my degree in Waterford, you think you know it all, and it's one of those things, and then you get a little bit of imposter syndrome when you're like, fuck, I don't really know much. And you kind of start looking at different things, and I come across Mike Boyle and Cressy and Athletes Performance at the time, and these different things. Then I was one of my, actually two people I know had gone and done the EXOS mentorship previous to me, so I kind of got in touch with them, found out a little bit more about it, and then eventually got accepted to a internship in the 1st of January 2011. I started, and I worked for 6 months there, so unbelievable experience kind of there. So
yeah, that's something we'll definitely dig into in a bit more detail as we go on. But you've worked with a few different sports and athletes, a nice range there over the last few years. Just kind of give us an overview of the sports you kind of have a bit of experience, but also touch on maybe what you've kind of brought S&C wise, and where you may not have known much about the sport, and how it maybe had to get you thinking a little bit differently.
Yeah, so main sport that I've kind of worked in was Gaelic football. So that's for the most part working with Cavan senior footballers, Longford senior footballers, and then a host of different club teams. But also worked obviously in hurling. Currently working in rugby at the moment with Old Belvedere. Working with Crusher Law GA as well. But worked with golf, athletes, boxers, MMA. So yeah, kind of worked across the realm with different types of athletes. I suppose my thought process would always be kind of look at the sport and look at the athlete. So try and reverse engineer the sport, see what the athlete's missing, how far away are they from whatever their position, if it's GAA or rugby. If it's golf, you're looking at club head speed. If there's an issue with distance, and then you're kind of looking at how you can close that gap. I suppose that's the real big thing for me, is looking at those two elements.
Are there a few key things you notice that are reasonably common to sports in terms of what I need to prioritise, but also maybe movement deficiencies, or is there a decent bit of variance?
Yeah, like my big thing would be training movements over muscles, and that's a big phrase that EXOS and Athletes Performance have used for years. So like I would be heavily influenced by them and other people as well. But like, yeah, it's movement competency, I think, is the big thing. What I'm looking for, particularly in field sport athletes, is can they, what does it look like when they sprint, when they decelerate, backpedal, cut, shuffle, all these different things. Because essentially what I see those field sports is it's sprinting plus, and it's sprinting plus, in GAA is tackling, jumping, catching, all the other things. And then in rugby it's probably a little bit more varied, because obviously you've got your front rows versus your different positions, so they're a little bit more kind of skewed. So like the likes of a prop would have different characteristics of what they need to be strong at versus like a wing or a fullback. Like prop, your max strength is very important to a prop, where maybe not as important to a wing or a fullback. Prop obviously needs to push in the scrum, need to lift in the line out, pick and go, driving balls, ball carrying, all those different types of things, where a wing or a fullback max V or max speed is going to be really important for them. So that's the key, evading defenders and maybe catching high balls. So like I try and break down the sport, because when I went into the likes of rugby, although I'd watched it, I never played. I had friends who played, went to private school, whatever, and that's the kind of tradition within Ireland. That's the way it is. It's not like GAA where nearly everyone plays soccer or GAA. So I kind of had to learn quick and fast, and I was applying principles, and that's a big thing that I think that I do and that's what EXOS kind of instilled in me from when I done my internship first. it was all about, a principles-based approach and not just throwing random methods. Something's fashionable, and whether it's mass or whatever it is, and someone just goes to town on that, and they're the whatever guy. So it would be much more of a principles-based approach, looking at the sport and then working back from there, seeing where the athlete's currently at, and I suppose logistics and, budget and different things will allow you to test the athlete a certain way, and maybe it could be very just rudimentary test, but try and get an idea of where the athlete's currently at and then try and close that gap. That's what my approach would be, really.
Yeah, we'll touch on those principles there as we go on, but saying as you've moved across to rugby or into rugby more so than kind of your main background in soccer and GA, how have you found it difficult, or have you found it difficult even to manage the different, I suppose, physical requirements of different positions? Like realistically in Gaelic football or hurling, if you trained everyone the same, it would lead to a benefit. It would be better if you individualised a bit, but if you were stuck for time, had a large group, you'd cope. Whereas rugby, it's probably not going to be the same. And how have you managed that, or what were some of the challenges you even had at the start?
Yeah, it is difficult. Like in my first year, it was more so the approach of, it was probably like bucket them depending on the issues that they had. I would bucket them on different things like that. But year 2 and year 3, I have tried to, individualise programs a little bit more, whether it's for your front 3 or your tight 5 versus, your middle type of positions, and then into your backs. So like simple things like, if I was doing some sort of a plyo in the program, I would try and later into the pre-season or into the maybe early in season of kind of like challenge or friendly games, I would be doing more, trying to do a plyo that would be more representative of what they're doing. So for example, if you have centres or any type of backs, evasion is really important to them. So maybe in the off season and early in season, I've done maybe altitude drops, so I'll go from an altitude drop into a drop jump and then into a lateral bound, for example, for them. Whereas I might do a 2-step quick plyo into like a vertical jump for a line out lifter or a line out jumper, for example. So they're small little intricacies, but whether they're making a big difference, it's maybe negligible. But like that's where I'm trying to individualise. But again, it comes down to logistics and can I actually do it? I'm lucky in Old Belvedere that I had support and have support. So I've a sports scientist with me, Aidan Shovelin. So and he'd be one of my good friends now at the moment. So between himself and Shane Malone, who I've worked with in the past, we'd be bouncing ideas off each other and see how we can individualise. But it all comes down to manpower, as you said. If you haven't got the manpower, what can you do? Sometimes it's very difficult to train a group of anywhere from 15 up to 30 guys. It's pretty much impossible. So trying to individualise it too much, unless you have them for a couple of years under your tutelage, and you can kind of build it from there. That's where things become a little bit easier.
Yeah. Would you say, sorry, I'm just going to jump in here, Murph, kind of, I suppose, in your programming for those different positions, you're nearly trying to keep, let's say, 80% of the program the same, and it's just that 20% where you can individualize. So it's always going to be negligible or minimal differences, but I suppose over time those minimal differences or minimal gains are going to accumulate.
Exactly, yeah. Like I would say definitely 80 plus, could be 90% of the program could be very similar or the same, and then it's those little 10%ers, and it's like in any type of program, I'm always testing and iterating different types of methods and means to try and improve. And for the most part, I would say 70% is like complete solid science. No one could argue with me. 20% I'm testing the water a little bit, and maybe 10% is a complete moonshot. And they're principles I've kind of taken from my work within Google. So that's kind of my approach to that. But you're spot on. Yeah, just minimal changes.
Yeah, I think I'd kind of have the same approach, and it means I found that it kind of puts a lot of onus then on the player as well. So you're like, well, this is your 10% that's just for you, or just for the wingers, or just for this. So make sure that you guys are doing this, because I can't police everybody's individual stuff at the same time. So it kind of puts more of an onus on them.
Exactly. And like sometimes if you are on pitch with regards to that, I know in rugby like they split backs and forwards a lot more, so that's where you can potentially work on your evasion based stuff, whether it's shuffle, cut, or any type of integration of those principles. And that's where you maybe get a little bit 10-15 minutes while the forwards are working on scrums or lineouts or whatever, and that's where you can start to integrate that stuff. So maybe in the gym it might be only a 5 to 10% change. On the pitch it could be a lot more. You could be up to 30% depending on, you know, how well you know your coach, how well you can work with him, and those types of things.
How much of it is potentially down to the belief the player then has in the process due to the bit of individualisation they're getting? Like if you have a group of 30 players and the 18-year-old 65 kg lad has the same program as the 29-year-old 95 kg lad doing the same program, like, well, I don't know, does this make sense? And if they think they've one little bit that's specifically for them, it's a class program, I love it. He's such a good coach.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And like that kind of all comes back to the buy-in element, and that's where I suppose at the start of when I am working with a new team, I'm always looking for the influencers and the key lads within the panel to, if I can get buy-in from them, like you're onto a winner. And like simple things like someone can't touch their toes and you can make a change on that in a couple of minutes. Like it's very, very easy. It's simple. Like it could be anything, but if you win over their trust for the most part when you're working new with a team, it's so vital, and they're the key things that I would be trying to do. But again, as you said, minimal changes for different types of lads, and they just appreciate that. Like, you know, it's just, you know, that's what they expect, I suppose.
I suppose it's very much the side of coaching too, where you kind of you drop out the science for a while and get to know the person, and like that's so important. I suppose, and I'm not going to mention anything, but I've been in clubs where people their previous were just kind of they didn't click with, you know, they didn't try to click. They came in with their sports science. This is it. This is the way. And that rubs off people wrong. So like that, like looking for those influencers, connecting with lads, actually getting to know lads, you know, chatting rubbish sometimes, but you get the buy-in as a result. It's such a huge part of coaching that for a lot of coaches it just comes naturally to them. But I'd definitely be suggesting, and I maybe you'll agree or disagree with it, but I would always suggest for young coaches to kind of like work on that, work on getting to know athletes, no matter what discipline you go into, getting to know the person as soon as you get in the door, so that you can actually bring that sports science in and make those improvements.
No, 100%, totally agree. Like you really do have to get to know them, and that's where, you know, going to different types of things, whether it's a team bonding or, you know, whatever. I know in rugby they do a lot of kind of different types of elements of team building, whether it's even going for drinks or having barbecues, and if you can go to them, that's how you get to know the people and the players. And I suppose then the other thing is that you probably come across this yourselves, guys, is that a lot of players within teams, whether it's rugby or GAA, have some sort of fitness background or, you know, S&C, and you've kind of got to go to those guys as well and say, right, do you find a certain way of training suits you, and maybe you bend a little bit towards that as well, or, you know, you try and mould them into your way of thinking as well. So there are different types of things that you potentially do as well.
Just find in general like common topics you can talk about, and they don't need to be related to the sport at all. Like a couple of teams I would this year and last year, they're big rural areas, so I'm going home and chat to my father about, you know, what's the big talk in farming at the minute, so I can just bring it up at Tuesday night and be like, geez lads, cattle prices terrible, ain't they? I've no idea. I'm just see what the response is like.
Yeah, they lead the conversation from then on as well. Yeah.
I'm so down to earth. I know what you're talking about in farming. You mentioned there working with Aidan Shovelin in rugby and Shane Malone, largely GA, around how you use sports science to guide what you're doing. Like the lads have done quite a bit of research, and while a lot of us would try to read the research and use that to inform us, what extra benefit is there from communicating directly with the sports scientists themselves in terms of follow-up questions to what's not written in the paper but what actually was important? How have you found all that?
Yeah, whether it's Shane or Aidan or whoever it is, like, or nutritionists, or bouncing ideas off different types of people, I think that's it. It's just kind of getting the nitty gritty out of the papers, because the papers can be very, you know, clinical at times, and, you know, it's easier just asking them, well, how did you collect the data? Who was it with? You know, the things that may not be in the paper per se, and the real practical elements of that. So that's the key. Like, whether it's GPS or load monitoring or whatever it is, like, and like I always just bounce ideas off them, and I've worked with both of them in the past and kind of continue to share ideas. And I like those guys would be coming from a little bit more of the straight, or what I would consider a straight sports science side of things, where they actually like doing the GPS. I hate having to do all that type of stuff myself. I want to be, you know, working with the guys in the trenches, not spending 4 hours after a session, chopping GPS and all that type of stuff and looking at load. I just asked them the hard questions. Right, how's that guy feeling? Is anything flagged here? More so that type of thing, and then getting them to assist me with testing and stuff, and just more data visualization. And the lads have unbelievable, like whether they're using Excel or Power BI and all these different types of softwares just to visualize and get the stuff across. And then I can go to the coach and or manager or whatever and say, listen, this is what's flagging, or this is where we're at now, and this is what we may need to work on. So it's just more getting a general ideas off them and bouncing those around, and yeah, that's it really.
It's quite an underdeveloped skill, the reporting of communicating of information you have. Like just throwing up a big list of numbers to players, and like here, I love numbers, I love graphs. But throwing up to players, they most likely don't have the same graph as I do, but putting that into some kind of easy to follow graph or whatever it is that players can understand and what it actually means to them can help with buy-in as well, I've found. Have you changed or even adjusted any practices based on feedback from the sports science end in either rugby or GA?
Not specifically from sports scientists, but just in general, I suppose, over the last couple of years, what I would have learned, again, maybe more so from working within corporate environments like Google, is maybe asking, for example, the manager and or coach, when I'm first working with them, how would they like these things communicated to them? And you maybe give them examples of, here's the complete remit of what it could potentially look like. Do you just want a one-pager? A one paragraph, a one liner, how small or big do you want it, do you want me to email it to you? Is it in WhatsApp? Am I going to ring you? Those types of different, just asking what communication method is best for them and how they would like to receive it, really. That's major.
Is there much variance there, or is it fairly common?
I would say it's fairly common. Most of them just want to, if there's flags, they want to be, and maybe after a game they'll want, a GPS report or whatever. But with regards to GPS, I think output stuff is not really the most important thing for me, and I'll be trying to educate the coaches and the managers on that. Like I don't really buy into the right, well, there's two half forwards, Johnny and James, and Johnny covers 9k and James covers 6k, but James is after kicking 1-6 and Johnny's chasing shadows for half the game. So output wise, I don't really, you try and get that across to them. The reason why I generally use GPS is for load monitoring more than anything else.
And I think just tracking distance covered is one of the biggest mistakes someone can use when coaching a team. To be honest, I think it's more important to be looking at high speed running than overall distance in general. And to be honest, the few times I've had access to it, I find it more useful for using in train to see what kind of outputs different games or drills or whatever I'm doing give me, so I can then use that as conditioning tools with an element of football or hurling inbuilt, as opposed to just, he is working harder than him, you're not working hard enough, that's why you're sitting on the sideline the next day. I think it's carrying it in with a negative view as opposed to being more proactive with the tool you have.
Exactly, yeah. Like, and we'd use that as well for, in the past, whether it's GA and or rugby, we've quantified, certain drills with coaches, and they'd have names, particularly in rugby, they name the drills. I know some county teams will as well, but then if they're repeating those drills, they'll know what a 60x20 grid will give you on a certain game with a 4v4 or a 6v6 or whatever it is. So at least I can take that away when I go working with a team, and I have a library of that when I'm working with teams who don't have GPS. I know levels might be different, but the variances aren't going to change that much, really. And that's the same with rugby, whether you're doing like that, like a lot of teams will use that Brumbies drill, like that Leinster use and stuff like that. So you'll know what that will look like from a meters per minute perspective, and then you can start dictating training from that, and I suppose keeping an eye on load as well.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more on that. Something we just wanted to touch on there was, I noticed you putting up on Instagram last summer, it was a bit around contrast training, and some of my own friends have asked me quite a bit about that, saying, should I start including it and different things. Can you just give us, like, obviously you said earlier, it's not just one method we use, it's the overall principles, but just a bit of guidance on what it is and where it could potentially be used and be useful.
Yeah, well, like when people mention contrast training, this is something that kind of carves back to me early EXOS days around nomenclature and what people say things are. Because when someone says contrast training, complex and contrast training kind of are used interchangeably when they're they kind of should be seen from the literature. They're kind of seen as different things. So complex will be more when you pair, say, a high force exercise with a high velocity, and they're done nearly back to back. So, for example, like a heavy squat with a similar type movement pattern, and then straight into a box jump, or 20 seconds rest and then into a box jump. Where contrast is more so you do maybe 3x3 of a heavy squat with your rest in between, and then you do, after you've finished your squat pattern, you'll then go into box jumps, for example, of a 3x3 or whatever, rep range you're using. So that's kind of, from a nomenclature point of view, that's the difference between complex and contrast, but they are used interchangeably. With regards to the actual method itself, I suppose, it just gives you, doing that high force exercise gives you a massive PAP effect, and that's, if you're caught for time and or resources potentially, that's really good. So you do your heavy exercise that stimulates basically the CNS and the nervous system, muscular system, and gets you ready to potentially supersede what you could do without having that effect beforehand. So I've used it in the past, depending on the age of the athlete, their experience, how long I've been with them, and then I've used like even further things, French contrast and stuff like that. I like to use that once I feel the lads are competent to do it, and it mightn't happen in year one, it might be down year 2 or 3 or further on, or you can water it down slightly where you might be going to the levels on the compound lift, and if you feel that they're competent on the other exercise, you can go there.
Yeah, just PAP there, for anyone who's wondering, is post-activation potentiation. It's where we're doing the heavy squat kind of fires up everything that's going to be used in, say, a vertical jump to hopefully make you jump a little bit higher than you would if you hadn't done the squat beforehand. A few ways of, say, including that in a program would be, a bench press into a medicine ball throw, the squat into a vertical jump or a hurdle hop, or what are some other ways you've paired exercises together?
Yeah, so that's like... you've mentioned a lot of them there. It's like if you're doing a squat pattern, it could be, whether it's a split squat or any type of squat variation, and then generally into hurdles and or box jumps, or depending on the time of the year and what you're looking from it, you would change it around. Potentially,
I suppose, maybe a mid ball or a weighted pull up and a mid ball slam, something like that.
Yeah. I've used pull ups. I've used a good few different variations. I've used even a lateral protocol with regards to the French contrast. So you could do, a heavy lateral lunge or lateral squat, and then into, any type of frontal plane movement with regards to plyometrics. Same with your weighted jump. You could do a weighted vest lateral bound, and then you go into a plyometric or accelerated plyometric lateral based movement as well. So there's lots of ways to skin the cat with regards to that. It's just, what can you think and what's safe to do.
But realistically, players will need a solid training base before. Like, if you haven't gym before, you're like, oh, this is going to be such a boost. You're probably actually looking for some sore knees actually after a couple of weeks, without having a decent strength base and having some fairly good movement competency as well.
Yeah, like I would make sure that the lads are very, very comfortable, at extensive base plyo exercise, and you're going to build that up in that off season and early pre-season. And it depends how long you've got the athletes as well before you can go into something like that. Sometimes you have a really short off-season window with the year that's been in it. Potentially you have a really long build-up period, and maybe you can go into more of these advanced methods. But yeah, I would use it definitely with caution. You just need to be careful, make sure that they are competent. The big thing for me is just force absorption, and most people miss that element. So I would do a lot of altitude-based drops into multiple positions, even in frontal plane stuff as well. So like I would make sure that you're able to absorb force, because realistically, if you can't absorb that force, you're more, I'd say 99% of the time, you're not going to be able to display that force.
At a very basic level, that's like sticking a landing after a jump. When you're dropping off stuff, what kind of height are you starting at, and what's safe to eventually build up to?
Well, like I've seen people like the likes of Dan Fichter using crazy heights. Wouldn't be going that high, but like, yeah, I would start off like anything even from a small box, just to get used to landing, depending if you're landing on a single leg or into a split position or bilateral. So yeah, I would say if anyone is playing around with it, I would start low and gradually build from there. But yeah, that's the way I go with it.
No, that's fine. So one of the big things I really wanted to chat to you about was EXOS. You mentioned it earlier, going doing your internship and all like that. So athletes' performance as you start. I think I heard of them first was it when Germany won the 2014 World Cup? They just contracted all of their physical preparation out to Athletes Performance at the time. They come in and actually build a gym in Germany's training base, look after physical training there, and they just put in coaches for the length of the camp. Then they go on and do it elsewhere. Would also have heard of him through some McKerwin and Flat stuff. He did he did the internship through there. He got definitely the Argentina job, and maybe a couple more through that. Just give us an overview then of what EXOS is, the Athletes Performance was, and then you can tie us into your own role there.
Yeah, so the company was set up in '99 by Mark Verstegen, and essentially he set up, it's a human performance company, and basically he wanted to set up a refuge for athletes to go in their off season. So as you may know, a lot of the American sports have long off seasons, and generally whatever S&C that's with the team, they kind of go and the players go and find their own place to train. So like Mark wanted to set up a place for athletes to go and train. So that was the main kind of hub of what he wanted to do at the start. And like I know you mentioned Germany with regards to teams and stuff. So there's kind of 5 main strands to the business. The athlete population. So whether we send coaches to clubs and or countries, whether it's China or Germany or wherever it is in between. Or we have them come to our hubs. So we've got hubs all across the Sun Belt. So generally, most of those players will, whether you're from New York, you're playing with a team in New York or Seattle or wherever you are, most of them will fly down to that Sun Belt, whether they're in Florida or Arizona or LA or whatever. So we have hubs in most of those areas, and like absolute state of the art, the best types of facilities. Like a lot of people, the listeners will have seen these facilities in the past. Everything you can imagine, best of equipment from, S&C coaches to physios to nutrition to psychologists to everything, anything you can think of in between. We have it there at our sites. But that's one of the main strands of the business, and that kind of gives a lot of the PR side of the business as well. But we also work heavily with corporates, Google, Adidas, Walgreens, a host of companies across the States and across the world. We have coaches at military bases across the world. We work within the community and have hubs in community centres and stuff like that, and coaches will be there. And then we've obviously got a massive education component to the company as well, where one of the big things was our mentorships, and a lot of people will come and do that week-long mentorship, whether it's in Arizona or one of our hubs, or whether we're going to different sites across Europe or Asia or Americas or Australia, wherever it is. But we also have a massive online component as well, so a lot of our mentorships have now gone online, which is really good. But yeah, the company's has grown exponentially over, I'd say the last 5 to 10 years. I think just last count was over 4,200 employees, but it's really, really big. So when I started back in 2012 full-time, we weren't near that. I would say we're in the hundreds. So it's grown exponentially, but it's great company to work for. As I said, I've been there since 2012, and I kind of had many different roles and responsibilities from when I was there. So essentially I was, my first role was as a performance specialist in Google's headquarters in Dublin, in the gym there, and working there, moved on to gym management, people management, operations, doing education with the mentorships when they were in Ireland or the UK, gym design, overseeing fit outs, building on online booking platforms inside Google, because we generally don't use outside vendors for that type of thing. But so mainly working in corporate health and performance. So that was the side of the business that I was mainly working on. Over the last year, I've moved roles. So I'm moving into the project management world. So essentially still human health and performance, but basically I work on the PGM EMEA team. So there's 4 of us within that team. I'm the only guy in Ireland. And essentially what we do is we test and iterate different products and services. And essentially we're trying to, build better products and services to engage people in health and performance. That will be the long and short of it, really. And then there's kind of 3 strands to our business within the corporates. It would be like a futures, and that's kind of looking at a 3-year lens maybe. And then our project management side would be kind of like a washing machine, where we test and iterate different types of things to engage people and get them moving. And then there's direct service delivery, which is where I used to work. So kind of moved into the project management world now, so finding it really enjoyable.
So is that a lot of that work with Google just focus on the physical health of employees, how to get more active, fitter, healthier, because it then transcends over to better work performance? Or are you going really close and looking at the link between the height of their vertical jump impacts the search speed at Google?
We could go down that type of thing, but we wouldn't use those specific metrics. No, we'd be using the 4 pillars. Like EXOS has 4 main pillars, and it's mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. So we're generally will touch on any of those 4 pillars. Like, so we have within Google Dublin, there's state of the art gym. It's, I think, 14,000 square foot of just gym space alone, kitted out unbelievably. I'd say it's one of the best kitted out gyms in Ireland with regards to equipment. We've got 2,500 square foot studio. Then we've got another studio in another building. We've got a 25-metre swimming pool, which is fully staffed. So we would, like, it's above and beyond what most corporates would have around the world, which is, it's unbelievable. And then you'd have your sleep pods, you'd have nutrition, you'd have everything in between, physio on site, dentist and nurse on site, doctor on site, all those different types of amenities on site. So it's really a great place to work. So you get the best of both worlds working for EXOS, but also working within Google. You get all the added benefits and perks of that as well. So, and as you know, within Ireland, there, like, if you're looking at, and this is what I kind of talk to when I'm talking to younger people coming out of college, you know, S&C or whatever, any type of role or remit within it, they're thinking of, you know, high performance all the time. And you and everyone on the call knows there's not that many jobs within high performance in Ireland. So you really got to think about what type of role you want to work in, really, and what's going to pay the bread, pay the bills at the end of the day. You can't go to your bank manager looking for a mortgage and say, well, I work for a Leinster or a Munster or whatever, and you're on pittance, and, you know, your job security is you're on a 1-year rolling contract. You know, he's going to laugh you out the door. So I suppose when I was younger, I kind of had the benefit of getting the experience of both sides of things. So that's what helped me along the way, and kind of I decided, you know, I can have the best of both worlds, work with county teams, work with high level athletes, but also have that steady, you know, income, and not wanting to be, although I'd like to work in pro sport, I don't want to be, you know, looking for a new job every year, every 3 years when a manager changes. So you just got to be conscious of that as well.
No, that's a massive point, just for any young coaches who might be, or S&C coaches or something listening, that, like, it isn't all rosy in the garden. I know we've had a podcast before where we discussed a little bit about it, but I still do see it, like, there's internships everywhere, and I see a lot of people going for them, and I see people, you know, maybe out of college 2 or 3 years, even with a master's behind them, and they're still going picking up unpaid internships, and they're just chasing that kind of that dream of getting into a professional sports team. But like you said, you have to remember that once a coach changes, you may not be kept, you know, and that's a big kind of worry that other careers don't necessarily have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's like, it's definitely underappreciated, I suppose, within the industry of, like, you know, job security and looking for a different job every year, and or going to move your family if you've, you know, been working with a province for, you know, for a prolonged period of time. Where do you go next, I suppose? And I've spoken to different coaches who've been in different types of setups within Ireland, and, you know, you've probably been turned off with going to the likes of in England to go to get a job in the Premiership, for example, or wherever else in between, because it means uprooting. If you've a wife, girlfriend, family, whatever, you know, it's hard to go and do that. So
I think even from, if you're in that chasing the dream scenario, like if you want to work in pro sports, I'm definitely not saying don't chase that dream, but I think even from an employer point of view, I'm sure they see a lot more in, say, if you did 1 or 2 internships and then went off and, say, worked with maybe a lower team, but you're in control of everything. Whereas I'm sure if if employers see, okay, well, he's done 5 internships back to back, he's missing something there, he doesn't have a go-getter where he wants the responsibility, he's always someone's right-hand man, like.
Yeah, no, I'd agree on that as well. And, you know, that's why I would definitely be encouraging people to go and get as much experience from the minute you start your degree, or even before you start your degree if you can, no matter what type of coaching you're doing, at least, you know, and just like help out in any shape or form with any team you can. It doesn't matter what level it is, whether it's youth, male, female, it doesn't really matter. Just get some experience on board. That's the key.
And in terms of, like, development skills, we'll come back to EXOS in a second, but this is going an interesting route. For young S&Cs who are in their degree or just coming out of it, and you have like your specific S&C knowledge and sports science knowledge you should have. But what's some other stuff? Because you touched earlier on just getting to know the people. What are some other skills that are actually quite useful, whether you do want to go that performance route or give yourself the opportunities to branch out into the corporate world, the public health world, whatever it may be?
Yeah, it's probably just, trying to be a people person as much as possible. Don't be a dickhead. Network. Like, it goes back to that All Blacks legacy thing. Just don't be a dickhead. Like, be a good person. Try and help someone, and not try and help them just because you think they're going to reciprocate down the line with something else, but just try and help them for, make their life a little bit easier. And that's what coaches want, and that's what I generally look for. I look for a good person, as opposed to, if I am hiring an intern or an assistant, or whether I'm hiring for EXOS within a service delivery, like we're looking for people, because we can always mould them and educate them to whatever way we want. So I'd rather go, and yourself in Ireland, you're only one person removed from anyone. Pick up a phone, and whether it's a guy in Mayo or Cork, whatever, you're going to be able to pick up a phone and go, well, what is this fella like, and if someone says, right, really nice fella, down to earth, willing to learn, to listen and learn, that's the big thing. But I would say definitely network, and try and get out, and not fake networking either, where you're fucking on LinkedIn, the amount of messages you get, and I'm sure you guys as well get it, and it's like basically asking for, free stuff, or what would you do here, like you don't mind if potentially it's once or twice, but not, bombarding you with messages and, looking for free information. It's they're the types of things. Just, networking, really, that's the key. And honest and truthful networking.
Yeah, I think nearly one of the skills that nearly stuck with me most from for S&C that was in no way related when I was doing it is like bar work when I was younger, because you learn to communicate with everybody, you learn to deal with so much stuff, you learn to bite your tongue when you need to. I think it just looks like you find people who come out of stuff like that or work in retail where they can just communicate with people. Like, as you say, their education, you can educate people more, you can teach them their process, but like if someone's just not able to communicate with people, it's a very hard thing to change or implement.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And like, we've hired people in the past where they've been complete introverts, and just like, as a coach, not that you need to be wild and like like some American, you'd see some of the college coaches just hooping and hollering and all this type of jazz, but they need to be able to, as you say, speak. And as you retail, bar work, like I never done bar work, but I've done a lot of retail when I was 13, 14, all the way up to 18, anything to help out and pay the bills, and a bit of pocket money and stuff. But it definitely helps you, because you're constantly communicating with people, and you have to come out your shell, and that's great. Yeah, another thing that people should definitely be listening to as well is to try and get those types of things on their CV as well.
Just before we move on, Damien, what would you say to anyone young looking to develop other skills than the kind of hard S&C stuff?
Just I suppose build up a little bit of experience in a lot of areas. You don't need to specialize as, say, a teenager or something. Kind of go, right, I'm gonna shadow coaches here, or the lads have mentioned retail, I better get into retail, for a few, like, get a taste of a lot of different things, and try to, I suppose, focus on rounding yourself as an individual before you get maybe down a college route. And obviously it's a good idea to have some idea of what you're getting into as well beforehand, if you can, but just really focusing on developing yourself all around, and having a lot of interest, or not just kind of keeping yourself to one or two interests. Try to get a bit of knowledge in a couple of different areas, whether it's sport, whether it's work. There's nobody ever struggled or nobody ever was harmed doing a summer of hard labour in a construction site, as you'll know well, Murph. Or a summer of farming into retail. Like there's a lot of different things there that can be done to build up a person's overall character and, I suppose, knowledge of the world. So it's just try to dabble in a lot of different things and be inquisitive. That's one of the biggest things, is like that serves people well going forward, is just asking questions, like we were speaking beforehand, and that we noticed from rugby on that, like, rugby players tend to ask questions when you program for them, whereas other sports maybe not so much. But just they'd be some of the kind of the key things, I suppose, so they're not even key things. It's just trying to develop yourself and get a lot of experiences in many different areas as you can.
Yeah, you mentioned on that, Damien, the kind of specialist and generalist. Like I would definitely, I was having discussions with coaches throughout the years. Like, eventually, when you are an S&C coach, generally in a county or a club, you are going to be a generalist for the most part, because you're not going to have the resources. So what I would say is specialise in an area, try and get up to speed to where you feel, you know, you're relatively competent. Then, you know, you're a generalist again. Then specialise in another area, you know. And again, as S&C coaches in Ireland, or, you know, performance specialists, or whatever you want to call it, you're going to have to know a thread of nutrition, psychology, culture, you know, all these different little things. So, like, dipping your toe in the water and seeing, is that for me? Maybe it is, right? Then, you know, go a little bit deeper into it, and then you become a better generalist then in the long run. So specialise, then be a generalist for a while if you can, with roles, and just keep building on as you go.
Yeah, some great stuff there. I've noticed from teaching an all-girls school for 7 years, it's made me very, very aware of my communication and how I say stuff, and who I'm speaking to in a particular manner, and how it needs to be changed. Also, the importance of creating an atmosphere around what's being done. Like going to a group of 30, 15-year-olds, and you have to create a positive mindset around activity. And it does become the same. If you're there on a wet Tuesday night and you have to do a physical training session, you do have to be positive, and not like you said there, that the whooping and hollering stereotypical American coach, but you do need to bring a positivity and kind of a proactivity to it for people to buy in, just even for that particular time.
Yeah. On that, actually, what triggers something for me is, even from the corporate world, is how you deal with different types of people within a corporate world. Because within your Googles and your big tech based companies, you have different cohorts. You'll have your young, energetic, nearly just out of college sales type people who are extroverts, and then you'll have, you know, your engineers who are completely different, completely reserved, and never been in a gym before. Like, I've amount of people that I've had never been on a treadmill before, and they're maybe in their 30s. So how you deal with them is completely different. So you're dead right with regards to different populations, and the more you expose yourself. So my experience with those types of positions would definitely have helped me, and dealing with people from different countries and different nationalities and, you know, different backgrounds, and even talking to them, you know, you kind of grow in that respect as well. So they always help, those types of environments.
That's actually something I've noticed with a few young coaches that I've had in, maybe, you know, doing a few months of just kind of shadowing and stuff, that they get thrown a little bit like both from a sporting and, you know, if you carry them into a little bit of corporate stuff as well, that they might be very used to sport, and they know that they can kind of have certain kind of banter, fun over and back with an athlete, because maybe they understand the lay of the land that little bit. But then you step into the corporate world, and you almost, you know, you have to completely change how you approach certain people there, or a lot of people there in the corporate world, and to almost put on that a little bit more professionalism. Like, while you might still, everything you might be doing in sport will be quite professional, but the way you might kind of you know, relay information might be a bit more kind of on layman's terms, or joking or jovial. Whereas in the corporate world, you do have to be much more professional. I've seen interns kind of struggle with that, you know that transfer over. So I suppose that kind of comes back to what we were saying a few minutes ago, that wide, varied world approach.
Yeah, and that's, I was only speaking with Shane about, I think it was Shane I was speaking with about this, or maybe another coach, but it's near what I would kind of class that as, you need to be a chameleon. Like, and not that you're being like facetious or anything like that, but you need to be able to speak to different cohorts differently. You know, whether you're in a corporate environment, whether you're working with GA players, whether you're working with rugby or golf, there's different etiquettes in different sports and with different people. And you've got to be able to not conform, but like, you obviously want to be yourself and not, you know, try to be a different person totally. But, you know, the kind of chameleon thing kind of comes into my head with that, and I just thought that's interesting that you mentioned that.
That was something you mentioned just before we started recording there, around how you've noticed not so much you are different, but you noticed the personalities and just the setup around stuff is different between GA and rugby. Just touch on that again.
Yeah, so do you want to run with it on?
No, I'll let you shoot first.
Let Damien dig his own hole.
I will.
I'll fill in the gaps.
So
I'll throw on the rest of them up on top of you.
That's it. I'm used to that. I'm used to it. No, I suppose what we were chatting about beforehand was just, I suppose, I'm very much, as many of our listeners know, I work in rugby, I play Gaelic football, I work in Gaelic football as well, but my background growing up was predominantly Gaelic football. So I've come from a deep knowledge of that, and then in my late 20s thrown into working in rugby. And I was blown away by just how different people were. And in a lot of these cases, like, you'd have a rugby club right next to a GA club, and a lot of them their schools would be in the same area. So you presume they're pretty much the same people until you get to know them. And even something as simple as we discussed there with, like, you program for a rugby team, you'll get questions. You'll get you might hear back from them, even just a thank you, or there'll be feedback. There will be stuff coming back your way. Whereas when you turn around then and you give information into a Gaelic football team or a hurling team or something like that, you might be met with silence or just complete blanket acceptance of what you said. You don't know if people understand what you said, if there's any questions around it. And often what I found is that when you do go then through people one by one, that you start to go, oh, this person didn't actually pick up what I was saying, and they just never asked, because that culture of maybe putting your head up over the parapet to go, hey, I'm not actually sure about what this is, isn't necessarily there. In my experience in GAA, whereas in rugby, in my experience of going around to different clubs and different maybe friend groups that I would have from rugby, they will put their head above the parapet. They'll put their neck on the line and go, here, what's the story with this? Or I think this is nonsense, or what. They'll say something. There will be something there. And I suppose that's just on a very simplistic level from an S&C perspective that I've found. You do get that completely different type of person. But then on the other side of it, my experience has also been just how maybe the communities, I guess, around each kind of each body there around rugby and GAA, that they seem to be quite different in that rugby clubs, I feel like they are very kind of close clubs. You mentioned start on, like, parents would be in for meals there before or after games. There's a lot of team bonding goes on, whether it might be staying around something simple for a few drinks after a game, or you'll find that lads they'll regularly organise things to do together. Whereas in the GAA, it can be quite broken. You can have your little cliques, and they kind of stick together. I didn't find that as much in rugby. But yeah, so there's a little bit of a background on what we were saying beforehand. But do you want to fill any gaps there for us on?
Thanks for giving the clean version there, Damo, as well.
No, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, it's just, yeah, I suppose for the most part, like, most of the guys in the rugby side are probably coming through a different education backgrounds that might contribute to, I don't know for sure, but, like, yeah, there's definitely is differences, like you mentioned, even with, like, say for example, a WhatsApp group where you throw in whether it's a new program, a nutrition or a tip or advice, and you'll get, out of the 35 rugby guys, you might get 30 responses saying thanks or asking questions, or it'll be something complete radio silence for the most part in GAA groups, which is interesting. So yeah,
unless it's just the four of us, and we're all four of us are the issue, but
potentially.
A coach I work with at the minute, he actually changed the settings in the WhatsApp group so only admins could put stuff up. So when we put stuff up, we don't expect a response, so you just don't feel bad about it anymore.
Good idea.
Just briefly then, to take it back to EXOS, you did an internship over there. Can you tell us, because we kind of would have heard of EXOS from, like, working with athletes, and as you mentioned, the athletes who are not in, like, it's a break from their full-time work, but they do an awful lot of work around the combine as well. And just for anyone unsure, combine is where they test all of the athletes coming out of college before they're drafted into the NFL, the American Football League. You got to work with a bit of a fairly successful group when you were over there in your internship.
Yeah, so when intern 2011, and for the most part, every single year since kind of then, and even before, we always had 10 plus first round draft picks, which is, if someone goes in the first round, they've basically coming out of college, they're going into the NFL, and they kind of train in our facilities anywhere from 4 weeks on the short end all the way up to 12 weeks, I would say, maybe a little bit higher depending on when their college season finish. And essentially, they're getting prepped for tests in the combine, and I was there 2011. Some big athletes, Julio Jones, AJ Green, Marcel Darius, Blaine Gabbert, just phenomenal athletes, and just absolute specimens of humans, like just something that I'd never seen before, just stuff that they could execute, like just seeing crazy stuff like Julio Jones. I seen he basically 3-stepped and jumped with his ass clean over a 6'6" mannequin, like it was legs straight out in front, like he was diving into a sandpit type of thing, and just phenomenal stuff like that we wouldn't have seen, and definitely in Ireland I haven't come across it in Ireland, and probably haven't even come across that athleticism since, really, in what I've worked in. A little bit close with maybe some of the rugby lads, but great experience. And so assisted on the combine, but mainly worked with the pro baseballers. They were in their off season at that time, so like dealing with guys there was one guy there, he had just signed a 10-year $187 million contract, this type of stuff, crazy stuff. Working with golfers, LA Galaxy were there for a couple of weeks when we were there, and Sporting Kansas City, so that was a good experience as well. So I got, like, working in a centre like an Athlete's Performance or EXOS facility is great, because you get very much a rounded experience, and you are like you do work, like, which is great, and that's what I wanted, like working 60, 70, 80-hour weeks, like working six days a week, and in there crack of dawn and not leaving until late in the evening. But that's what I wanted, and I suppose that really accelerated my development and my thought process. I suppose when I came out of college first, I thought, like most people coming out of college, you think, right, I'm ready, I'm set, let me go, just where's all the athletes, like, let me train them. But I suppose that environment isn't in Ireland, so and maybe you can't get that experience. So I feel like what I done in the 6 months there was probably worth 2, 3, 4 years worth of coaching for some people, because I was just on the floor, and if I wasn't on the floor, I was reading, or if I was tapping up coaches within the facility and asking them for ideas, what would I do, or I was training myself and running the methods, I suppose, behind the principles that EXOS give you. I was testing those myself, which was great.
Are you getting much feedback on your coaching methods when you're out there, so that you can improve? I always find that's one of the big things to improve as a coach, is someone externally viewing you.
Yeah, like there was weekly education sessions. So like at the very start, I think there was 12 or 13 interns. There was 1 or 2 dropped out over those 6 months, but so at the start they're not just throwing you in with athletes straight away. You're doing the shake bar, towels, these types of things. You're more viewing for maybe a week or 2, but after a couple of weeks, myself and another guy got on really well. They knew we were working hard, we were listening, we were asking the right questions, we were there to help, and they kind of gave us a lot more stuff. So first off, there's a high school group that comes in, so I start getting coaching those. To give you the pillar prep and movement prep first. You go through that, make a few mistakes, learn, go, because you're essentially following a principles based approach, and you're following the EXOS methodology essentially, so you're kind of learning that as well. I had read one of Mark's books as well before, so I had a little bit idea, but trying to implement it is a little bit different, and how they want you to implement it is a specific way. So kind of once you felt up to speed, after about a month, I was coaching away, and got more experience. And maybe when you're with the real athletes, like outside the high school group, they might just give you the pillar prep or movement prep to start. They might give you a component, or you might be going in doing a demo on a Bulgarian split squat, and you'll talk through that. You talk to the athletes through that, and then you just get more and more coaching experience. So it was great, yeah. I actually, after 2 months, I was coaching Mark Verstegen's wife, so I was giving her training sessions as well, which was great. So I got on well there, and I kind of building rapport with her and some of the other coaches. That kind of gave me a little bit of a footing within the company. I suppose that's how I got offered a full-time position a couple of months later.
Just sorry, now I'm slightly all over the place with some of these questions. The likes of Julio Jones and people like that, their abilities, how much of that do you think is genetic, and how much has some element of coaching to it, or so much of it just I just try and stay out of their way?
No, a lot of it's genetic, yeah. So I won't mention that one of the guys who went first round as well, both of his parents were Olympians, and there was we had a big issue with trying to get him to eat healthily. So he would be at In-N-Out Burger, Wendy's. So we were providing state-of-the-art food, breakfast, lunch, dinner, have in-house or take away or whatever. but he would be, you know, always eating like what nutritionists or anyone guiding people on nutrition would not say is, you know, what you should be putting fuel in your body with. Yeah, for athletes. So
at the same time,
but like
in and out is quite hard to pull yourself away from. I'm saying
Yes.
that here as a nutritionist, but yeah, that's a tough one, man. It's definitely a tough one.
That's what I was going to say. So 4 weeks, I suppose, would definitely be a small amount of time if you're trying to elicit any serious power gains or speed gains. Is a lot of it down to working with the athlete's mindset and working with their nutrition and just making sure they're in the best shape to attack the combine rather than making too many wholesale changes?
Yeah, like for some people, if you have more time with them, you're going to be able to elicit bigger changes in certain things. Whether it's like, and it's the look of the athlete as well. So like, if they're coming in and their body comp is up, that could be one of the big things you want to be working on. Some of the things could be just, you know, technique on the 40. You know, start position. Like if you drop their 40 from a 4.6 to a 4.4, that could take them from round 3 or 4 into round 1. Like, you know, depending on their position. So it all depends, I would say, but there's definitely everything from like a real holistic approach is taken, and there is like technique from a position point of view. So there will coaches, specific NFL coaches, be coming in, whether it's quarterback or, you know, D line or O line and stuff, and they're coming in and working with the athletes as well. And then even from a video point of view as well, so they'd be tightening up their knowledge of how they read and how would they, because teams want to know, like, are they willing to work? That's the big thing. So maybe it's when the scouts are looking at them, I've probably looked at them over a 4-year period, and they'll see where have they come from when they walked in the door of Alabama or Oregon or wherever they were, and where are they now, or specifically where were they when they were in year 4 of the program in Oregon or Alabama, and where are they now? They're the types of things, because, you know, they've probably recruited them. They're just basically as well seeing if they're good people and a fit for the organisation.
It's that's a very interesting I was about to ask you on there. So the combine is a global event at this stage. You know, everyone's watching it because we see the boundaries are constantly being tested, they're constantly being pushed, and it's just a feat of just fantastic human athletic ability each year. And I suppose one of my question is that part of it that you just mentioned there, we don't hear much about that. We don't hear, you know, about QB coaches coming in, defensive line coaches coming in, working on that actual game specific stuff. And we've done a good few podcasts on, you know, sports specific skill development, and that you know, not just focusing on the S&C, you know, the power and speed and fitness perspective. But one of the things that I found from working with athletes is that everyone is interested in the combine. Everyone sees what they're doing, and they focus in on those explosive things. And go, that's what matters. Like from your position in EXOS and working with athletes in Ireland, working with you know, high performance athletes in Ireland, have you ever kind of come across, you know, that a struggle to pull guys back from the S&C side of things a little bit and get them to think about their sport? And how have you kind of approached that yourself?
Yeah, like I couldn't agree more. Like I think some S&C coaches think they're more important than they are, and I've definitely more of a realist on that. Like I think the game is the most important, and like I suppose I can't think of someone off the top of my head now, but maybe like the likes of a Gooch didn't, you know, playing for Kerry back like not too long ago, what he, you know, his S&C and what he done probably outside. Now I don't want to speak on his behalf, but from the outside looking in, you wouldn't think that now he was spending 2, 3, 4 days in the gym in his off season and doing X, Y and Z, but he had natural abilities and definitely worked on those, and that's what set him apart from other people. But I do think, like you said, I think maybe young guys, players and or coaches are putting too much emphasis on, you know, your strength. Like you need to be reverse engineering the game. What is the most important thing to make you a better player, whether it's skill set, whether it's speed, you know, what do you need to work on to make you a better player? So I think there is maybe too much of an emphasis put on S&C at the moment, and maybe some coaches hide behind that because maybe they're not that good of actual, you know, football coach or rugby coach or whatever type of coach they are. And it's like, oh, they weren't fit enough. Let's get an S&C in and let's do X, Y, and Z. So, and like you see it at the highest level, and I most certainly hear about it at the highest level. Like you talk to different coaches, and you'd be hearing anecdotal stories about what has happened, and you know, a loss comes after like really good performances, and there was nothing there was no question about fitness then, and then all of a sudden fitness is the issue, or something else is the issue. So,
and once that's in the player's head, it's very hard to put to deprogram that again. Like once it's said almost once, even we weren't as fit as them, or they were physically bigger than us. All of a sudden you've a team of players who you're like, no, we just couldn't connect passes. Trying to decommission that, pull them back from that can be quite tough.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
And that's not to say that fitness isn't a thing. It's you need to be fit enough. Simple as, you need to be fit enough. And the fittest team doesn't win. If you win because of fitness, it's because the other teams have neglected their fitness straight up. You do need to bring it to a certain level. Just one thing I'd say there on Gooch, when we had Carl Dillon on before, he did his thesis on bilateral players and skill levels of Gaelic football, and he said to one player, God, you were very natural, weren't you? And he took it as an insult, say, I worked so hard at my skills. And we don't know who it was, like it was anonymous. I would guess it may have been Gooch. But he just said, I worked so hard, nothing was natural. Nothing. And a lot of the players said they put so much in. I think sometimes people say, oh, those players are good because they naturally had it. And I think it can take away from the level of work they put in outside the field on their actual skills, as opposed to on fitness or anything like that too.
Yeah, and on that, like a dual-sided player, whether it's hurling or football or whatever it is, like that's what gets them out of trouble in 99 times out of 100. Like that's their ability to now, they've more resources to lean on, and that's what makes them a better player for sure.
Sorry there, Shane, what were you going to say there?
I was just going to say we kind of touched on that point where S&C is and everything last week when we said with body fat percentages, and like players could come in and be like, oh, I'm actually got down to 8% this week. I was like, well, that's great, but like you averaged 2-3 a game last year and you've only scored 2 points in the last 6 matches. So like that was Damien as an example, just so everybody knows. But yeah, it's those kind of things.
Yeah, and that goes for strength as well. You see people just chasing PRs, and you see coaches just chasing PRs, and like even in season I hear of it. I'm like, what? Like it's crazy. It's crazy stuff.
It's like, I suppose you'd be kind of having conversations with people going, how do we eradicate this? But we have to be honest, there are S&C coaches too who are propping this up, because like you mentioned, it makes them more important than what they actually are in a team setup. Keeps them employed, keeps them in jobs, so there is a degree of that you're trying to combat against it as well. But it's trying to find that balance and hoping that you get in with a team whose coach actually, I guess, understands that you're trying to just get them to the level, but then it's the actual sport they need to be good at.
Exactly, yeah, and that's why, like I was saying earlier, you just need to be careful who you're getting into bed with regards to coaching and management. Like I have a really good network of coaches, managers, sports scientists, nutritionists who, like, if they are potentially looking for an S&C coach, they will ask, potentially get a lot of offers from that point of view, and vice versa. I'll be able to make recommendations from having worked with different people as well. So that's really good to have that kind of good network of different people that you can trust and rely on when needed.
Oh, and you've been absolutely brilliant with your time today. Can you just let anyone listening know where they can find you, or a little bit more about EXOS?
If you're looking for any more information on EXOS, I would just go onto the EXOS website, whether it's some of our online education. We've got performance specialist cert there, which I would highly recommend. It is costly, but you will definitely get everything back out of it for sure. So EXOS website, and then if you want to contact me, I suppose the easiest is either on Twitter or on Instagram. I think handle is Maguire 9.
Oh, that's some absolutely brilliant, some really, really interesting stuff there today, and we'll definitely be pushing this one out. All right, thanks a million.